Hi guys, James Smith here. So this morning's question is, how happy are you? Like if you had to rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 10, what would you give yourself? Would it be 6, a 7, 8? Maybe you feel like you're a 2 lately. I don't know, but wherever you're at, that's what we're talking about this morning. We're talking about happiness. When I'm not happy, sometimes I'm not actually that keen on picking up on it. I don't always know right away, but the people that know me best and are around me a lot, they can pretty much tell. Like if you come over to my house on a Saturday afternoon and the garage is in perfect order and everything is spotless and the cars are detailed, you can tell something is up. Something's up in James's life, because when I am unhappy, I typically look to fix things, organize things, and I think it's just that when I'm unhappy, it's because I think things around me aren't going the way that they should be, and I'm just looking for all of the things that I can control. Maybe you know what I'm talking about. You know, maybe you run around and clean the house like crazy when you're unhappy. Maybe you go out and fix all the things that you can think of. I don't know, maybe you're completely different, but that's me. I look to control what I can and make it the way that I think it should be, because I'm trying to make up for the things that I can't put right? So maybe you're like that, maybe you're not. Maybe there are other tells that you have in your life that something isn't quite right and you're really not settled inside. You know, you just can't say that you're happy. But no matter what it is for you, I can almost guarantee you that when you're not happy, you are going to go on some kind of a quest, right? I think everybody goes on some kind of a mission when they're not happy. And it's not like a conscious thing. You know, you don't stand back and go, I'm not happy, therefore strategically I'm going to go on a mission and I'm going to do A, B, and C until I'm happy again. You know, I think it's really not that formal, right? Most of us don't do that. But my experience is, you know, we look to do something about the thing that's making us unhappy. You know, we start fixing things, or we start buying things, or looking for things, or selling things, or doing more things. There's always some kind of a thing that we're trying to do or get, or maybe even be. And the truth is, it usually doesn't work like anywhere close to what we hope it would do. It just doesn't. My experience is most of the time it's just a diversion. You know, it keeps us somewhere where we're not focused on our unhappiness, but at the end of the day, the unhappy is still there, and it hasn't gone any place in the meantime. You know, it hasn't gotten better, and it's just waiting for us when we come back from our diversion. And here's the thing. I'm going to tell you that it's probably not a thing. The thing that makes you unhappy is probably not a thing. I'm going to bring you back to something that Jesus said. And if you're listening and you're not sure what to do with Jesus yet, that's fine. But once you hear this, here's the thing. It's going to stick with you for the rest of your life. It might be the most important thing that Jesus ever said. And I know that you've heard it before. If you've ever been in church for very long, you've heard this quote from Jesus, but you may not have applied it to happiness, okay? And it's going to take a little bit of imagination for a minute, but I'm going to bring you around full circle. Just listen to this, and I'm telling you, I'm going to help you along for the ride. So Jesus, in Matthew 22:36, is being tested by people in public. They're trying to trip him up because they don't like what Jesus represents, and so they're constantly looking for something they can trip him up with. So they're asking him all kinds of questions. It's no risk to them to ask questions. Sometimes they're embarrassed, but they're just trying for everything that they can. And a lawyer comes up to Jesus, the Testament, and says, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? What's the most important thing that God told people to do?" Here you are in the spotlight, Jesus. Answer the question. And Jesus, it says, said to him, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and all your strength. This is the great and the first commandment. And then the second is like it." They didn't even ask for the second, but he gives them the second. "And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself." In other words, if you love God with all that you are, And the result is going to be you're going to love your neighbor the same way that you love yourself. You really can't do the second one. You can't do the first one if you don't do the second one. That's kind of what he's saying. You can't just love God but then hate people. It doesn't work like that. You can't love God and just be totally, I don't want anything to do with people. And here's the reason, because the people are Jesus' children, and if Jesus loves the children, you can't hate the children and love the parent. Not if the parent loves the children, right? It doesn't work that way. Some of you have friends that have kids. If your friends love their kids, you can't really get away with hating the kids or not caring about the kids at all if you really, really love the parent. It's just not going to work in that relationship, right? It's just not cool. And so Jesus is saying, look, you got to do both. You can't do one and not the other. It doesn't work. And this is where it takes just a little imagination. So just step back for a moment and think about this. If this Jesus is really the Jesus that was foretold, and he's actually the very likeness of God as a human being, as a person, and he's come and he's giving us aid, he's here to do something for us, and he says, look, the most important thing in your whole life, the most important thing in your whole life is to love God and to love people. Well, you're probably not ever going to be happy if you realize you're not doing both of those things. You're not going to be able to have peace in your spirit if you realize those are the most important things that there are and you're not doing it. Even if you don't think about it outright, even if you don't talk about it, even if you never really studied anything that Jesus said, there's going to be something inside your spirit that just knows something's not right between me and God. Something's not right between me and people, and there's some kind of a gap there. There's some kind of a break in that relationship. You're really never going to have happy no matter what you do. Not if Jesus is telling the truth. I believe he is. Let's just test this out for a second. So if what Jesus says is true, if these are the most important pieces of life, loving God and loving people, and that you can't really do one and not the other, you can't do the first and not the second, then you could do all kinds of things. You could put all kinds of things in order. You could buy things, sell things. You could have lots of margin in your checking account. You could do anything really, but you're not going to be happy unless the gap is taken out of some of those extremely important relationships. And let's test this out, and let's just think back to a time when you were the happiest that you can remember. Maybe that time is now. Maybe you're the happiest you've ever been right now. That's great. I'm happy, right? But was that time the time that you had more money than you've ever had? That time that you're so happy, so at peace inside, was it because you had more money than you've ever had? Was it because you were caught up on everything? I don't know. You answer the question. Was it because you had a better something, a nicer apartment, a better vehicle? Was it because you had a better job, a better paying job? Was it because you had more margin in your checking account? I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm actually going to put words in your mouth, and forgive me for that ahead of time, okay? But I'm putting myself out there. I'm going to say, I think I know that when you were happy, it really didn't have anything to do with things. That time in your life, then, now, really didn't have that much to do with the things, material in your life. How things were going, how many things you had, how many things you didn't have, really doesn't have a lot to do with that at all. I'll bet that it had everything to do with someone and not something. I'll bet that the happiest time of your life is the same time as the time when your closest relationships were in the best shape. Your relationship with God, your hope for your relationship with God was in the best shape that it ever was, ever is. It's either because you had relationships with people that were very, very good. You had a relationship or was starting a relationship with God and you thought that was very, very good. Or it was both at the same time. That's my bet. My bet is that it was all about someone and not so much about some things. And I would go so far as to say that if you're not happy, it's got everything to do with relationships somewhere. There's a gap somewhere between you and others and a gap between you and God, or maybe you feel like there's both at the same time, even worse. And really, everything that you try to do on the side in between, all the things that you try to get done, all the things that you try to get to, all the things that you try to put out that you don't want. None of those things really do what you're hoping for in that relationship. You know, it's tricky. It's tricky, relationships. People ask for things from us. The most important people in your life ask for us to do things for them. You really can't be a responsible human being and not do things for people, to get things for people, to give things to people. But it's tricky because maybe you know this to be true. Maybe you've been on the other side of this. People can be so things-oriented, doing things for each other, and get so caught up in doing that, and still somehow manage to have a big gap in the relationship with the person that they're doing things for. I bet you've experienced this somewhere. You can carry on in a relationship and still do so much for someone, or have someone do so much for you, carry on like normal, and at the same time you can still have a real fracture in your connection with a person. It's amazing. It's almost like pretend. It's almost like you can carry on and hope that some of the other things that you're doing for somebody, around somebody, are going to kind of make up for the big gap that's between you, and maybe it will be enough. But I know this to be true, and I actually believe you agree with me, that really, no matter what is going on, no matter what you're accomplishing, no matter what you're organizing, fixing, accumulating, if there's a gap between you and somebody else, or a gap between you and God, or both, that gap just sits there, and it stays, and it stays, and it stays, until you backtrack and you do the thing that you needed to do to close the gap. No matter what else is going on, no matter what you've done, no matter what they've done, no matter what the exchange is between there, until that gap gets closed again, you just won't feel settled. You just won't find yourself happy in that relationship. You know, we've all felt that at some point. We all know what that's like. And the question is, are you satisfied with it if that's where you're at? I'm guessing you're not. I'm guessing you're not. So really, if that's where you are, you have two options. Number one, you can just leave it be. You can leave it like it is, and you can keep doing things the way that you're doing. And you won't just, evaporate and vanish. You won't just implode immediately. It might happen eventually. I don't know. I don't know how far along you are in the process, but I do know this. You can go a very, very, very long time without healing a gap between you and another person or God. You can go so long. You can go right to the end of your life sometimes. One of the hardest things for me is a relationship that I had with someone in my family who's passed away now. It was my grandfather. My grandfather, I'm telling you what, I learned so much from my grandfather. I'm thankful, genuinely thankful for my grandfather in my life. I love some of the things that I learned. I find them so helpful to me. They've motivated me. They've really been a help, and so I'm thankful for them. But at the same time, there were a lot of things in my grandfather's life that weren't so great. one of my hardest memories of my grandfather is that he just was never happy with anything. I don't know another way to say it. He just was not a happy person, and he really focused on work. He seemed to thrive best at work. That was his driving purpose in life. It seemed to get things done and to worry about things, and then to work until he didn't have to worry about those things, but then he'd have to worry about the next set of things. And he was always kind of anxious and always kind of worried about everything. And there's really not too much that you could do to impress him. The best you could do was that's a pretty good job. That's a pretty good job. That was probably the best you were going to get. And you just worked so hard and hoped that someday you could finally impress him and finally get him to stop worrying about everything, and he could just breathe and just feel human and smile and laugh. But I'm just being honest, I've never knew somebody who worked so hard not to ever smile, not to ever hug somebody, not to ever celebrate. In fact, he actually felt guilty, I think, about celebrating. He was always concerned if we got too happy or we, started to feel like we could just breathe a breath of fresh air and relief. He would start to get nervous, and he started warning us, pride before fall, everything's going to come apart. You can't do that. And so it's just kind of a rough relationship for most of us. And I didn't understand any of that until I was an adult. Now, I was somewhere around 26 or 27 when he was in his final year of life. And I didn't put any of that together till his final year of life. He was 88 years old. And I was trying to have some conversations with him about why he was relating to his family the way that he was. And of course, we're having tension, because there's tension when you're in your final year of life. Just a lot going on there and a lot of stress. And so I was trying to work through some last year of life things with him. And it kind of came out that a big piece of the reason that he had been so hard for his adult life was because he had had 3 children, and his first 2 children had been born and been healthy, regular functioning adults in time, but he had had one child that when he was born, it was very apparent right away that he was severely developmentally disabled. And that was so difficult. And it was not just difficult to bear, but it was difficult to actually just figure out how do we operate a farm and do all the things that we need to do. They didn't have a lot of money, and they didn't have a lot of help, and they didn't have a lot of time, and so after a while it was just very apparent that they couldn't actually have him at home, and they had to bring in outside help, and he actually had to live outside of the home in care all the time, 24/7. And so he had really been confused about why that had happened. He didn't understand why God would let that happen. He had worked so hard. He didn't run around and do terrible things to people. And so that was something he couldn't understand. So he started to distance himself from God. Started distance, and slowly, surely just didn't want anything to do with God over time. And at the same time, he felt guilty. He felt guilty that he couldn't have his child with him, his son with him, and it felt like in some way he'd actually abandoned him and left him. And so he had this terrible guilt about that, and kind of projected it on everybody else. And here's the thing. He went like that for 50 years. 50 years. Never spoke a word about it to anybody. Never confessed it. Never tried to deal with it. Never tried to just put a name on it and just chisel into it. And he had his own way of trying to deal with that, and his own way was to just let there be a gap between himself and the family, and let there be a gap between himself and God. And I'm telling you what, at 88 years old, having known him my entire life, It was a surreal experience as he started to talk about some of those things for the first time. I never imagined in my wildest dreams that my grandfather would ever talk about anything that really mattered, that bothered him, that he struggled with. And it wasn't until, he was facing death nearly that he actually got into some of those things. But I just wonder how things would have been different for everybody, for him, for the family. How would things have been different if he had just named that earlier on and looked at the things that were happening in his relationships and looked at the distance that he was putting between himself and God and just recognizing how incredibly unhappy he was and how incredibly anxious he was about all of it, about knowing that he wasn't sure about God. He wasn't sure if his family could accept him ever. It was just too hard. And I just wondered, how could it have been different if that had happened earlier on? Not just for him, but for everybody else. Think of how an unhappy person affects a family. Think about all the repercussions over time. Think about how it affects the attitudes. Think about how it affects decisions of other people, the reactions of people, young people as they grow up, and how they react to some of the characters and the attitudes that they experienced earlier on and the decisions that they make from then on. It would have made such a difference. Who knows? I can't say. But I'm telling you, I'm asking you to consider that if you're really not happy, start by just, number one, admitting, I'm really unhappy about something. But then listen to what Jesus says and replace the something that you think is the issue with the someone that the issue is really with. See, if you realize that it's a someone and not a something, it's a relationship and not a thing that's the issue, you're well on your way. You're well on your way to overcoming whatever it is that's your issue. And after you can identify that there are issues with someone or some people, God or your wife or your kids or your long-lost cousin Al, whatever, that's when you can start. That's when you can start. And you can go back to the gap. That's what I call it. Go back to the gap. Replace something with a someone, but then go back to the gap. Where did the relationship start to weaken and break down? Is there somebody that needs forgiving that's never been forgiven? Is there some forgiveness that needs to be asked for that you've never asked for? Is there something that needs to be given back that you took? Is there something that you're not listening to when you really just need to listen? Is there something that you're not willing to admit that you just need to admit? What is it? What is it that needs to happen to bridge that gap? That's my challenge to you this morning. It's to replace something with someone when you're unhappy. Is it something or is it someone? You've got to figure that out. And then when you realize that something in a relationship with someone is the problem, then it's time to go back to the gap. What could be the result in your life if you're willing to do this? Is there some serious chunk of unhappiness in your life that could be left behind forever? What if this could be the last week or the last month, the last year of dealing with the same unsettled feeling about a relationship in your life, the same unsettled feeling about where you and God stand? If you've never actually tried to work on your relationship with God and you've been putting that off and just closing your eyes or putting your head down in the sand and doing the ostrich thing, my challenge to you this morning is to get alone somewhere. Closet, the bathroom, the car, go for a drive, to go outside early or late when you can just be alone with your thoughts and pray or try to pray for the first time, and just to go to God and to start fresh, and to take a leap of faith and to say to Him, Lord, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I have allowed distance between us. I'm sorry that I've put off talking to you. I'm sorry for the things I've said and done toward others that didn't honor you and how you love them. I'm sorry. And I understand I don't have enough inside to make all that better. I really don't. I admit it. And to just say, will you forgive me? In the name of Jesus, will you forgive me, Lord? I accept your forgiveness. I ask for it and I accept it. I know that you want to give it, but I confess so that I can receive it. That's where you should start this morning. Whether you're an old Christian, whatever that means, or you're just a brand new believer this morning, or whether you're just a human somewhere in between, it doesn't matter. You can start there today and then ask God to guide you in your relationships with others in a way that honors Him. That's what He's after in your relationships. He's just looking for you to honor Him. As Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. And the second most important commandment is like it. It's to love your neighbor as yourself. He wants to help you. He knows you're weak. He knows that you fail. But He wants to help you. He wants to guide you. That's my prayer for you this morning, that you do that. My prayer is that you would go to Him and pray for that very thing. And next week we'll pick up where we just left off, what to do next. See you soon.